My husband said we had to leave my best friend's baby shower immediately. Then I learned the real reason. What he told me next turned my panic into shock and changed everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. I should have noticed something was off. I've gone over that day in my head so many times trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything shifted. But the truth is, it didn't feel like the beginning of anything. It felt beautiful. It was a warm Saturday afternoon. I was 32 weeks pregnant, just big enough to feel like a house, but not so big that I needed help rolling out of chairs. The kind of day where you're glowing in every photo even if your feet are swollen. My best friend had planned the whole thing her baby shower. But since we were due only weeks apart, she'd insisted it would be a celebration for both of us. 2 bellies, 1 party, she said in the invite. I laughed when I read it. We hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, which was rare. She said she'd been tired, then caught a cold, then had a scare at the clinic, but everything turned out fine. I didn't push her. I knew what pregnancy could do to your schedule, your mood, your body. I figured we'd catch up at the party. She'd give me one of her famous long hugs, maybe cry a little, then we'd sit down and compare swollen ankles like we always joked we would. The party was at her place, a modest 2-story house she'd bought a year before, decorated with pastels and paper lanterns and little white onesies strung on twine across the patio. It looked like something out of a magazine. She opened the door with a wide smile, arms outstretched. "There you are. You look amazing," she said, pulling me into a gentle hug. I hugged her back. Her belly touched mine, or at least I thought it did. We laughed at the awkwardness of it. She smelled like lavender and lemon cookies. "Where's he?" she asked, peering behind me. I turned. My husband was a few steps back, carrying a wrapped box and a reusable bag full of wipes and bottles. "There," I said. "My human stroller." She laughed again and waved him in. He offered a polite smile, not his usual one. He was a doctor in internal medicine, but he had a quiet intuition about people. He never said much unless something was wrong. I remember thinking he looked tired. Inside the house was filled with soft music and a low hum of voices. Everything was color-coordinated pinks and greens and soft golds. On the kitchen island, there were cucumber sandwiches, sliced fruit, cupcakes shaped like tiny bassinets. A white frosted cake read, "Almost there," in curly script. She had truly outdone herself. "Do you need to sit?" she asked, gesturing to a large armchair. "I'm fine," I said. But I sat anyway. She perched on a stool nearby holding a mason jar of lemonade. People trickled in. Mutual friends, co-workers, a couple of her cousins, no one I didn't recognize. I smiled through small talk, answered all the usual questions about cravings and kicks and what I thought labor would be like. I looked over at her often. She smiled when people asked her about her baby, patted her belly like clockwork, laughed at all the right times. But she didn't waddle, not like I did. Her feet weren't swollen. Her fingers looked normal. Her breathing wasn't shallow. I brushed it off. It wasn't until she stood to greet someone new that my husband leaned over and whispered, "We need to go soon." I blinked. "Why, I'll explain later." That's how he always spoke when something serious was happening. Calm, deliberate, short, but I waved it off. "Can we just stay until after she cuts the cake?" His jaw tightened. 15 minutes, then we leave. I looked at him, searching his face. He didn't look angry. He looked alert. I excused myself to go to the bathroom and tried to shake the tension from my shoulders. Maybe he was tired. Maybe something at work had followed him home. I splashed water on my face and returned just in time to see her refusing a hug from one of her aunts. "Careful," she said, laughing nervously. "I'm feeling super sensitive today." She stepped back when the aunt's hand reached for her belly. Not rudely, just enough. It registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but I didn't question it. She always hated people touching her. The cake was cut, the gifts opened. She cried when she saw mine, a soft pink blanket I'd hand-knitted over the last 3 months. "I love it," she said, holding it to her chest. "She'll sleep in this every night, I swear." I smiled. She had tears in her eyes. Then, almost as if on cue, my husband stood. "We're going," he said, his voice low but firm. She looked up, surprised already. "I have a patient follow-up." He lied. I knew it was a lie. He wasn't on call. I stood anyway. My legs felt unsteady, like I was suddenly made of paper. I hugged her goodbye. She squeezed me tightly, her voice soft in my ear. "I'm so glad you came. Let's do a movie night soon. Just us." I nodded, but something in my stomach twisted. As we walked to the car, I could feel it building. The cold, quiet fear that only comes when someone else knows something you don't. We got in. He turned the ignition. For a moment, the only sound was the soft click of the air conditioner starting up. Then he looked at me. "She's not pregnant," he said flatly. My heart stopped. "What? She's faking it." I stared at him. My pulse began to roar in my ears. "That's insane. I'm telling you, as a doctor, he said there's no pregnancy. No swelling, no shifting center of gravity, no gait change, no vascular changes in her face. Her breathing's not restricted, and she flinched when someone touched her belly. I swallowed hard. That doesn't mean I've seen this before. He pulled out of the driveway. In residency, he continued, there was a case. A woman came in unconscious, claimed she was 36 weeks. There was no baby. She'd worn a silicone belly. Turned out she'd lost a pregnancy 2 years earlier, never told anyone. She started tracking someone else's pregnancy, became convinced it was meant to be hers. The air felt thinner suddenly. My throat closed. Are you saying, I'm saying, he cut in gently, you need to be careful. I looked down at my belly. My daughter moved beneath my hand just once, like a twitch, like she knew something I didn't. You think she's watching me? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I stared out the passenger window in silence, watching the blur of trees and driveways as we passed. My husband kept his eyes on the road, both hands steady on the wheel, but I could feel the tension in him, not anger, something quiet or focused. He was doing the math in his head, probably replaying every second of the last 2 hours. I swallowed hard. You really think she's lying? That she's pretending to be pregnant? I think it's possible, he said. More than possible. I didn't answer because I didn't want to believe it. It felt too big, too messy. This was the girl who held my hair back while I threw up in the first trimester. The one who showed up at my door with mango slices and almond milk when I said I couldn't keep anything down. She cried when I told her I was having a girl. She's my best friend, I whispered. He glanced at me briefly. I know. That's what makes it so dangerous. I sat back in my seat and rested my hand on my stomach, needing the contact, needing the reminder of something real. My daughter moved again, just a small flutter, but it grounded me. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the thoughts crowding in. She said she had a scare a few weeks ago, I said after a while. That's why she missed dinner. He nodded. And did she say what kind of scare? Just spotting, I think. Did she say what hospital? No. Did you ever see any ultrasound pictures? I frowned, trying to remember. I'd seen one once. She'd texted it to me early on, but it was blurry and generic. Could have been anyone's. At the time, I didn't question it. I was just excited we were going through this together, and now I wasn't sure. She always asked about my appointments, I said slowly. Every time, like clockwork, he didn't respond. And when I'd tell her, she'd say things like, I'm a week ahead of you. Or that's what happened to me too. I thought it was just shared experience. He exhaled slow and quiet. People in her state of mind mimic what they see. They become experts in patterns. They follow the routines, the cravings, the due dates. They copy everything because they're not living it. They're studying it. I turned to look at him. Are you saying she's obsessed with me? I'm saying she's emotionally unstable. That doesn't automatically make her dangerous. But she might be. Yes. The word settled between us like smoke. I tried to picture her now back at the house, still smiling, still floating through her perfect shower. She'd cried when she opened the pink blanket I'd made, held it to her chest like it meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe it meant more than I realized. She always asks if I'm alone, I said suddenly. What? When she texts, she says things like, are you by yourself? Or is he home? I thought she was just being considerate. He gripped the wheel tighter. And when I told her I was picking a birthing center instead of a hospital, she kept asking about protocols, about who'd be allowed in the room, about pain meds, and how fast the staff responded. That's not normal curiosity, he said. That's someone planning. My breath caught. She asked me for my birth plan, I whispered. Said she wanted to compare. I sent her mine. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. I closed my eyes. It was like replaying a conversation from a dream and realizing it had been a nightmare all along. I thought back to one night in particular weeks ago. She came over late, said she'd just gotten out of therapy and didn't want to go home yet. I let her in. She brought soup. I was too tired to eat, but she insisted, stirred it for me, put a blanket over my legs while I sat on the couch. I fell asleep before I finished the bowl. When I woke up, she was gone. The bowl was rinsed. The lights were off. I remember thinking how kind that was. Now I wondered how long she stayed after I fell asleep. If she walked through the house, if she stood at the foot of my bed. I shook my head hard. She hasn't done anything to hurt me, I said out loud. Maybe to him, maybe to myself. Not yet, I flinched. But we don't wait for that part, he continued. We take distance. We stop giving her information. We lock down. Should we confront her? No, he said immediately. That could escalate it, especially if she believes she's doing nothing wrong. I nodded slowly. She always told me she had a name picked out, I said, but she never told me what it was, just said she didn't want to jinx it. That's what people say when they don't have one. I leaned my head against the window and watched the sky go dim as we turned onto our street. He was right. She knew everything about my baby. Her name, her due date, my fears, my routine, where we kept the spare key, what medications I was allowed to take, my allergies, my birth plan, everything. And I didn't know the first thing about hers because there was nothing to know. That realization didn't come like a thunderclap. It settled slowly like fog seeping into a room I thought was sealed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid awake long after he drifted off, one hand resting on my stomach, the other clinging to my phone like it might provide some sort of answer or proof or clarity. I didn't find any of that. What I found was a digital scrapbook of patterns I hadn't noticed before. I started with her feed. She'd always had a clean, aesthetic neutrals, soft pinks, candids that looked accidental but clearly weren't. I scrolled down months back to when she first announced her pregnancy. A mirror selfie, just her facing sideways, one hand cradling a modest bump. The caption was vague. Love grows here. There were no tags, no location, no doctor's name, no ultrasound. I hadn't questioned it then. She'd told me personally just a few days before posting it. I was already 10 weeks along, barely showing, when she called me sobbing and said she had news. I remember holding the phone in one hand and assaulting in the other, laughing and crying at the same time. We'll be pregnant together, she said. We'll raise them side by side. That call had felt like a gift. Now it felt like something else entirely. As I kept scrolling, I noticed something I hadn't registered at the time. Her posts were always about the pregnancy, but never about a pregnancy process. She posted bump updates, but never ultrasound photos. Talked about kicks, but never about appointments. She never mentioned a doctor's name. Never mentioned cravings or insomnia or back pain. No baby shower planning until she brought it up weeks ago, and then I found it. The gap. There was a period about 5 months ago where she didn't post for weeks, just stopped cold. No stories, no captions, nothing. Before that, there had been some excitement. A few maternity outfit posts, a shot of a prenatal yoga mat, then silence. I clicked through our texts from around that same time. There were none. I'd messaged her a few times asking how she was. She replied late saying she was tired dealing with migraines, resting offline. I remembered worrying a little, but I was so nauseated at the time that I didn't push it. I barely had the energy to shower. Then about 6 weeks later, she was back, but something had changed. The photos became different. Same style, same filters, same soft lighting, but now her body was never fully visible. Only partial angles, always the same corner of her apartment, the same wrap dress, always alone. One of the most recent posts had been just a flat lay baby clothes folded neatly on a white bedspread, no context. The caption read, "Almost ready." It looked like a catalog shot. I checked the tags, none. Checked the comments, nothing odd. Then I opened the image again and zoomed in. The clothes still had tags. A few still had the clear packaging lines visible. They hadn't been washed. She hadn't posted anything about a hospital bag. No car seat, no prenatal vitamins. But she knew what brand I was taking. She was the one who recommended it. I felt my throat dry up. I tapped over to her stories. Recent ones were just reposts of baby quotes, affirmations, things like, "Strong mama's birth, strong babies." And "I can't wait to meet you, little one." Nothing personal, no videos, no belly movement, no voice. My husband stirred beside me, I whispered. She stopped posting right when she would have lost it. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "What?" I turned the phone toward him. "Here," I said. "These are her posts before the silence. She looks genuinely pregnant. These are from after. Same dress, same background, but always cropped, never touching her stomach, never showing skin." He squinted at the screen. "It's the same picture over and over. She never told me she lost the baby, but I think she did. I think she lost it and just pretended she didn't." He didn't answer right away. He didn't have to because we both understood what that meant. This wasn't someone acting out of jealousy. This wasn't just about envy or grief. It was delusion. It was replication. I remembered now. 2 months ago, I was at her place for tea. We were sitting on the couch and I asked her if she wanted to feel the baby kick. Mine had just started strong movements and I was beaming with pride, eager to share it. She paused, looked down at her stomach, then smiled softly and said, "She's shy today." I hadn't thought twice. I just nodded. But now I saw it clearly. She didn't let me touch her, not once. My husband leaned back against the headboard. If she lost the baby and never told anyone, she could have decided to just continue the story with mine, I said quietly. He didn't speak, just watched me. She always said it was fate that our girls would grow up together, that we'd be on maternity leave at the same time, that they'd have play dates before they could walk. And I'd believed her because when someone calls themselves your best friend, you don't look for lies. You don't expect betrayal dressed as love. But now I knew what she'd really meant. We weren't sharing the experience. She was borrowing mine. The more I let that idea take shape, the more it started filling in the blank spaces of the past 8 months, like pouring ink over invisible writing. It was all there, buried in plain sight. The calls, the mirrored symptoms, the odd deflections when I asked basic questions, the growing distance between her posts and reality. I wasn't just remembering now. I was investigating, and I couldn't stop. That morning, while my husband went to work, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and my laptop open. I pulled up every digital trail I could think of. Text threads, email receipts, even our old pregnancy tracker app, where we'd logged milestones together. She'd stopped updating hers months ago. No explanation. It was all too carefully curated, too symmetrical. She always said she was exactly 10 days ahead of me. Our due dates lined up with mathematical precision. When I mentioned my baby kicking, hers had just started too. When I said my feet were swelling, she said she'd gone up a shoe size. But now that I was looking at the details, none of it added up. And then I checked something I hadn't thought of before. Her old blog. It was a lifestyle blog she barely updated anymore, but years ago she'd used it like a digital diary. Most of the old posts were locked behind passwords, but one was still public, a short entry from just over a year ago. It was a grief piece. She didn't name the loss, but I recognized her tone. The words were sparse, stripped raw. When your body breaks the promise before you ever got to keep it, how do you tell anyone? How do you say goodbye to someone no one else ever met? I hadn't seen that post before. She never told me. The timestamp was from early spring, 3 months before I found out I was pregnant. My hands felt cold on the keyboard. I looked at the date again. If she'd had a miscarriage around then, and I told her about my pregnancy in late summer, that gave her time. Time to mourn quietly, then reconstruct a version of herself that never lost anything. Or rather, to reconstruct a version of me. I opened her social media page again and scrolled to that same time frame before the loss. Photos with her partner at the lake, smiles, wine glasses, a caption that read, "Grateful for everything coming." Then nothing for 5 weeks. After that, baby content almost immediately. But this time, her captions changed. They became more abstract: growth, quiet power, miracles. And not a single one ever said the words, "I'm pregnant." Not once. The announcement, I remembered, had never really existed. I had projected it. I assumed because she'd told me over the phone, because she'd said it with conviction, because she shared symptoms and sent bump pictures. I assumed she'd made it public. She hadn't. The bump photos were staged, the captions vague. She was never lying to the world. She was only lying to me. I leaned back in my chair, pulse thudding in my ears. I felt stupid, but more than that, I felt invaded. I thought about the blanket I made her, the one she clutched at her shower, how her eyes welled up when she held it. She hadn't been moved because it was a gift from me. She was moved because she believed it was for her baby. My baby. I texted my husband, but he didn't respond right away, probably in a patient consult. I sat still for a long time. Then, out of instinct, I opened her profile again and checked her story. There it was. A blurry image, no caption, just a mobile of pink clouds hanging above a white crib. I recognized it. It was the exact model I had bookmarked on my registry. Not a common one, handmade, expensive. She hadn't liked it when I first showed her. I remembered. She said it was too whimsical, but now it was in her nursery. Unless I pulled up the image again and zoomed. The walls behind the crib were familiar. I looked across the room at our guest bedroom. Same shade of soft cream, same narrow vertical windows. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body tensing as I walked down the hall. The room was empty, of course. The crib hadn't been delivered yet, but the walls, they matched exactly. I stared at the image again, and then I saw it. The edge of a mirror in the corner, the reflection of the window, the faint outline of a framed photo I knew sat on our bookshelf. She had taken a photo inside our house. Somehow, somewhere, I stood there for what felt like forever. And then the doorbell rang. I froze. Not because it was her, I was sure it wasn't, but because in that moment I realized something far worse. She didn't need to be present to make me feel unsafe. She just needed access. She had rewritten herself into my life with such careful mimicry that she didn't have to steal anything physically. She only had to convince me she already had it. The doorbell rang again. I didn't move. Eventually it stopped. I checked the camera feed. It was just a delivery driver, a package, something I didn't remember ordering. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a pale pink swaddle blanket. No note, no receipt, just folded fabric soft as breath. I dropped it and backed away. The real gift wasn't the blanket, it was the message. I'm closer than you think. That's what the blanket meant. It wasn't about warmth. It was a statement, a symbol, a warning disguised as affection. And maybe the worst part of it all was how subtle it was, how soft. I didn't tell my husband about the package until that night. He came home late, looked exhausted, and I couldn't bring myself to start the conversation over dinner. I waited until we were in bed, our daughter rolling under my ribs like she could sense something was wrong again. She sensed something, I said quietly, staring at the ceiling. He sat up, instantly alert. What? A blanket. No return label, no note. It was delivered to the door. I checked the camera footage. She wasn't the one who dropped it off. It was a courier. His expression changed. Something between fury and concern. You're sure it was from her? She bought the exact one I had saved in my registry. The one she told me looked too whimsical. She knew what it meant to me. He rubbed his hands over his face. Okay, we changed the locks again. Cancel any deliveries, notify the registry site. You need to stay offline completely. I nodded. I already deleted the registry. He looked at me. She was in this house. I know. A long pause. We don't give her an inch, he said quietly but firmly. I didn't say what I was thinking. She didn't need an inch anymore. She already had the blueprint, not just of our home, but of me. That weekend she started texting again. Not aggressively, not with threats, with kindness. Thinking of you. Want to grab lunch this week? My treat. I had a dream about your little girl. She's going to be so strong. I'd love to bring you dinner sometime or just sit with you if you're feeling anxious. I know how overwhelming it gets this late in pregnancy. Every message was perfectly phrased. No malice, no pressure, just the slow drip of someone who refuses to believe the door has been closed. I didn't respond. She texted again 2 days later. I can't help but feel like you're pulling away. Is everything okay? Then did I do something wrong? And finally, you don't have to go through this alone. You know that, right? I blocked the number. She messaged me on a different one the next day. I saw a bassinet today that reminded me of yours. I almost bought it. You still need one, right? I didn't block it immediately. I just stared at it for a long time, wondering how she remembered the brand. Then I realized she didn't remember. She'd written it down somewhere in a journal or document or notebook. She'd been tracking my pregnancy like it was her own. My cravings, my vitamins, my birth plan, the swaddle blanket I added to the list 2 months ago before deleting it. She wasn't improvising. She was copying. The following week, the texts stopped, but the calls began. Blocked numbers, voicemails left at odd hours. Her voice sounding steady, measured, compassionate. I know you're overwhelmed. I can help. I just want to help. I know you're scared, but don't shut people out. That's how mistakes happen. One night, my husband's phone buzzed. He answered without looking, thinking it was a patient. I heard her voice before he hung up. You don't have to protect her from me. His face went still. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he locked the phone and said, we need to take this seriously now. No more waiting. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew we'd been treating her like a friend who lost control. But friends didn't show up in your house when you weren't there. They didn't send blankets that mirrored your dreams. They didn't rewrite your life and offer it back to you. One message at a time. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to replace me. A few nights later, she called my mother, told her she was worried that I wasn't answering, that maybe something had gone wrong with the baby, that someone needed to check on me. My mother called in a panic. I reassured her as best I could, but the damage was done. Now she'd inserted doubt into my family. And that was the point, wasn't it? She wasn't trying to force her way in. She was trying to make me look unstable, isolated, like I needed help. Help that only she could provide. A few days after that, a box arrived at my mother's door. A full newborn Leet said a note attached. She'll look beautiful in this. Can't wait to meet her. My mother asked if I'd sent it. I told her no. She didn't ask again. Instead, she came over the next day, sat on the couch beside me and said, tell me everything from the beginning. So I did, and she didn't interrupt. Not once. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, so what are you going to do? I looked down at my belly, my hand resting over the soft curve of it. I'm going to disappear, I said. Not forever, just long enough. Those words didn't sound dramatic when I said them. They felt surgical, like closing a wound. We weren't running. We were removing ourselves from reach, from interference from her. The next morning, my husband and I started planning. We canceled all remaining appointments at the birthing center. I emailed my OB and requested a transfer of care, citing relocation. We wiped our phones, factory reset, everything. No SIM cards, no cloud backups. We pulled cash, prepped a rental car under his cousin's name, and packed only what we needed. It took 2 days. In that time, we told no one. Not my friends, not his parents, not even my mother. Not because we didn't trust them, but because we couldn't be sure who she might contact. The fewer threads she had to pull, the less chance she'd find us. On the third morning before sunrise, we left. We drove for hours in silence through state lines, past gas stations, and empty rest stops, through towns we'd never heard of. Eventually, we arrived at a furnished guest house behind a farmhouse. Quiet, private, rural. A friend of a friend owned the place. No paperwork, no records paid in cash. There was no mailbox, no doorbell. It was perfect. We changed our names at check-in. No real names, not even close. My husband listed us as a couple on sabbatical. No questions asked. I deleted all remaining apps. No more pregnancy trackers, no social media, no notes saved on my phone. We kept one burner phone turned off unless absolutely necessary. He used it once to let his cousin know we'd arrived. Nothing else. I kept thinking the paranoia would ease once we were there. It didn't. I checked the windows every few hours, kept the curtains shut, walked slowly from room to room like I was still being watched. My daughter kicked constantly now, each movement like a reminder. I'm here. I'm close. Protect me. And I did. We kept the lights low at night, moved only during the day. I memorized the sound of our new refrigerator's hum, the exact creak of the second floorboard in the hallway, the flicker pattern of the motion light by the back door. Every unknown sound sent a jolt through me. It wasn't about logic anymore. It was about safety. And then, as if the world wanted to challenge our commitment, we started hearing from people. Not directly, not clearly, but in fragments. An old friend texted the cousin who booked the rental. Just a casual message. Hey, weird question. Have you heard from her lately? Someone's been asking around. The cousin didn't answer, just forwarded it. Then another message from my husband's former colleague. There's a woman looking for you, says you're close friends. Seems worried. No name, but we knew. She wasn't using threats or drama or showing up. She was casting lines, hoping someone would bite. I watched him delete each message without replying. He didn't even flinch, but I could tell he was waiting for something worse. We both were. For 2 weeks, nothing came. We stayed quiet. My belly grew heavier. My back hurt constantly, but the silence stretched long enough that we almost let ourselves breathe. And then we heard from the midwife, not our current one, the first. She left a voicemail on the burner phone, confused. Hi, I'm just calling because someone came in asking for your chart. She said she was a family member and that you'd been transferred here. I didn't give her anything, obviously, but she was persistent. My husband played the message for me on speaker. My whole body went cold. She tried to access your medical records, he said quietly. I nodded, throat tight. She's getting desperate. No one knew we'd used that clinic except for her. I had mentioned it once in a conversation months ago when I was still deciding. She must have written it down, remembered. I felt nauseous not because of her persistence, but because it was working. She had gathered enough puzzle pieces to trace our steps. She was behind us, not far but not close enough to act, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The next day, I received an email on an old account I forgot was still active. The subject line read, I forgive you. The body of the message was blank. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I just read it once and deleted it. That night, my husband sat beside me on the bed and asked, Do you still think she's trying to hurt you? I thought about it. I didn't feel like she wanted to hurt me. Not physically, not directly. I think she wanted to be necessary, indispensable. Like if she inserted herself deeply enough into my story, I wouldn't be able to cut her out. That I'd need her, invite her back in. That I'd eventually hand her the one thing she couldn't fabricate. My daughter. I think she believes she's helping, I said finally. I think she really believes that. He didn't argue. Because that kind of belief is exactly what makes people dangerous, especially when they start to lose control of the story. And she was losing it. We just didn't know yet how far she'd go to reclaim it. But we found out it happened 5 days later. I was 38 weeks and a few days on edge, swollen, constantly short of breath. We just finished breakfast when the burner phone rang. It hadn't made a sound in over a week. My husband picked it up. I watched his face change. It's the clinic, he said, and put the call on speaker. It wasn't our new midwife. It was someone from administration. She sounded nervous. Hi, I wanted to let you know there was an incident this morning. My husband glanced at me. She continued. A woman came into the hospital claiming to be the mother of a newborn. She gave your name. She said you had the baby early and that there was a mix-up with discharge. She tried to convince staff the baby was hers. The room went still. She didn't get far. The hospital flagged the ID she gave. Fake. When she couldn't produce any medical documentation or prenatal records, security stepped in. She became agitated and started screaming at one of the nurses. What happened next? He asked. She collapsed. Psychologically, not physically. She was taken into custody under a 5150 hold. My breath caught. Wait, I said, sitting forward. She's in a psychiatric hold. Yes, the woman said. She's being evaluated now. It'll be at least 72 hours, possibly longer, depending on what the attending determines. I felt like I was floating outside my own body. Did she name us? My husband asked. Yes, she said several times. She insisted the baby was hers and that you pause, that you were helping her but then changed your mind. She said she forgave you. He closed his eyes. I stayed quiet. The call ended with a promise. They would notify us if she attempted contact again, that she wouldn't be released without a formal review, that she was no longer a loose thread. But that wasn't how it felt. It felt like the air had been knocked from the room. For months, she'd been circling, building her world around mine like a second skin. Now she had ripped through the fabric and exposed everything. And I didn't know if I felt relief or grief. Because the girl who once cried at my engagement party, who bought us matching mugs when I told her I was pregnant, who sat beside me during my second trimester scan while my husband was at work, that girl had unraveled. I had sensed it, denied, it justified it. But the truth was, she'd been losing herself long before she tried to take anything from me. She really believed it, I said softly. Didn't she? He nodded. Delusional disorder or grief-induced psychosis? Maybe both. I thought I would feel safe when it ended. He looked at me, and I feel haunted. That afternoon we sat together in silence. Not out of fear anymore, but out of exhaustion. I slept for 3 hours straight, the first uninterrupted sleep I'd had in weeks. When I woke, there were no missed calls, no blocked messages, no sudden shadows at the door, just him and the soft stretch of my daughter pressing upward beneath my ribs. We didn't talk much that night. We didn't need to, but there was one thing I had to say. You were right. He looked up from the couch. You saw it before I did. All of it. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. He just said, I wish I hadn't been. We packed our things over the next few days. Carefully, slowly. Not because we were rushing to leave, but because the moment we had waited for had finally come, the one where we could return home without looking over our shoulders. Still, I moved cautiously. The weight of everything still lingered. I kept thinking about the moment she must have realized I was really gone, that I had stepped out of the life she'd built in her mind. What had that felt like? What final crack opened wide enough for her to walk into a hospital and say out loud, that baby is mine? We'll never know. But someone had heard her. Someone had finally drawn a line. It wasn't justice. Not exactly, but it was something. It was enough. The night before we left the safe house, I walked into the nursery we'd created from borrowed furniture and hand-washed linens. I sat in the rocking chair, slow and heavy, and whispered to my daughter that she was safe now that nothing was coming for her, that the story being written around her was ours and no one else's. And for the first time in months, I believed it. The drive back felt like we were coming up for air after being submerged too long. Roads that had once felt neutral now felt personal. Familiar storefronts, old intersections. Everything looked sharper, clearer, like the fear had bleached away a layer of dullness we didn't realize had settled over our lives. We didn't tell anyone we were back. Not right away, not even my mother. We moved quietly, rented a small apartment under my husband's name through a friend. No forwarding address, no social media posts. I used a different number to reach out to my new OB, booked one final appointment to check everything before the birth. I was 39 weeks and 5 days when I went into labor. It started slowly. Tightness, then pressure, then the kind of pain that made me grip the edge of the kitchen counter and whisper, okay, now he was ready. Our bags had been packed for days. He loaded the car calmly like he'd rehearsed it in his mind 100 times. I sat in the back seat, rocking gently, focusing on breathing and not thinking about everything we'd just survived. The hospital staff was kind attentive. They didn't know our full story, just the basics. No visitors allowed. Private room, no information released to anyone not listed explicitly. My husband had explained the family situation delicately but firmly. They didn't ask twice. The labor lasted 11 hours. There was pain, of course. There was blood and sweat and crying. But there was something else, too. Something I didn't expect. Peace. It was the safest I'd felt in a long, long time. When she was born, the room went still, not quiet. Still like the world paused for a breath and whispered, she's here. They placed her on my chest and everything dissolved. Fear, exhaustion, anger. She blinked up at me, eyes swollen and sleepy, her tiny fists curling in the air like she was stretching after a long dream. I didn't cry right away. I just held her and whispered her name again and again. He sat beside us and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached out and touched her hand and said, we did it. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like we were surviving something. I felt like we were starting over. We stayed in the hospital 2 nights. My vitals were strong. Her APGAR scores were perfect. Every time someone walked in the room, I tensed slightly, expecting a disruption, but it never came. The hours passed like water through fingers, slow but sure. On the second morning, I finally turned my phone back on. There were dozens of missed messages from my mother, all checking in. 2 from an old coworker and 1 name I didn't expect to see. The hospital administrator. I hesitated before opening it. It was short. She's been placed under long-term psychiatric observation. She won't be released until cleared by court-appointed evaluators. No attempts at contact have been made since the incident. You're no longer on any active concern list. Just thought you'd want to know. Be well. I showed my husband. He nodded once and deleted it. We didn't talk about her again that day. Not because it wasn't important, but because she had finally been pushed far enough from our orbit that we didn't have to rearrange our thoughts around her anymore. When we got home, my mother met us outside the building. She didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms around me while I held my daughter in her carrier and whispered, "You did everything right." We didn't post photos for a week. When we finally did just one image of her tiny hand curled around mine, I turned off comments. The caption was simple: "She's here safe hours." Nothing else. But I saw it the next morning. A like from a profile I didn't recognize. No picture, no post, just a vague username that could have belonged to anyone. Anyone. I showed him the screen. He shook his head. "Could be nothing," he said. I nodded, but it could be her. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. He was right. Because now, even if she was watching, she was doing so from the outside. And for once, we weren't looking back. But that didn't mean she vanished completely. Obsession leaves residue on your habits, your thoughts, your routines. Even in peace, I found myself flinching at unexpected knocks, checking locks 3 times before bed, keeping the stroller handle wrapped tightly in my hand whenever we went outside. She was gone, but not erased. And that was the difference. Our daughter was nearly 6 weeks old when the first letter came. No return address, no name, just our names handwritten in neat, careful script on the envelope. It was slipped into our mailbox directly, bypassing the postal system. My husband found it first and opened it without a word. Inside, a single page typed. "I missed the version of us that never got broken." That was it. No signature. We didn't show it to anyone, didn't take it to the police, didn't scan it, document it, file a report. We just burned it and watched it curl to ash in the kitchen sink. Not because we weren't scared, but because we had decided something long before that we would not be pulled back into her narrative. She had taken enough. Still, the timing rattled us. We had told no one our new address. We moved again 2 days later, this time even smaller, more remote. We didn't announce it. We didn't even change our mailing info. Just paid cash, unplugged the internet, and kept the world at arm's length. The silence returned, and with it a kind of uneasy rhythm. We started seeing a therapist, a specialist in trauma dynamics, together and separately. It helped. She helped. She never once used the word crazy. She used words like disassociation, projection, fixation, words that made the situation feel clinical instead of cinematic. My husband talked more during those sessions than I'd ever heard him speak in our entire relationship. I talked less because I didn't know how to describe the grief of losing someone who was still alive. That was the part no one prepared me for. She had been my best friend, the kind of friend who sat on the bathroom floor with me while I vomited, who cried when I did, who sent flowers after every OB appointment, and knew my Starbucks order by memory. And yet all that closeness had been weaponized, used as scaffolding to build a reality where she got to live inside my skin, where she got to rewrite the rules, where my child became her ending. I didn't talk about that in therapy. Not for weeks. But eventually I did. And when I said it, I cried. Not because I was scared, because I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight of someone else's unraveling. The therapist said something I still think about often. Not all grief is yours to carry. You're allowed to lay down what doesn't belong to you. So I did in small ways at first. I opened the curtains. I went for walks without scanning every face. I let myself laugh when my daughter kicked a sock off and giggled like it was a joke, only she understood. I stopped checking our security cameras every morning, but I never deleted them because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means adapting. The second letter came 2 months later. This time it was left on the windshield of our car while we were inside a grocery store. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper, water stained at the edges. She would have loved me. You know that, right? My husband found it. Didn't even show it to me until hours later. When he did, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at it, then quietly shredded it and flushed the pieces. He watched me. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm getting better." We both were. We'd agreed early on that if she ever reached out in person again, if she broke the terms of her psychiatric release, we'd involve the authorities. Until then, we kept documenting quietly, safely, letting time prove what emotion couldn't, that we were not playing her game anymore. And slowly, life began to return in shades. Our daughter rolled over for the first time on a rainy Thursday. She smiled when we sang off key. She hated socks, loved ceiling fans. We were building something new, something real. There were no baby showers, no shared mother-daughter playdates, no parallel pregnancies, just us, the three of us. One night, my husband asked, "Do you think she'll ever stop?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I said, "Do you think she knows she needs to?" He didn't say anything, because that was the truth neither of us could admit. We weren't afraid she'd come back. We were afraid she'd never realize she shouldn't. And in the end, we were right. 3 months passed, then 4. There were no more letters, no knocks, no messages through mutual friends. The silence stretched so long it became suspicious in itself, too clean, too complete. We started to think the obsession had found a new outlet, another subject to cling to, someone else to mimic or follow or fixate on. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the pause before an aftershock. And then in the 5th month, the hospital called again. Not ours, a facility several counties away. My husband answered the phone standing at the edge of the kitchen with our daughter asleep on his chest. His voice didn't change while he listened. It rarely did. He hung up and looked at me. "She's back in." "Involuntary psychiatric hold," he said calmly. I stopped stirring the bottle in my hand. "She did it again." He nodded, went into an emergency room claiming she had a baby, told them someone stole her daughter at birth, insisted they run DNA tests. Staff flagged her immediately. This time, they didn't just hold her. They transferred her to a long-term inpatient psychiatric center. She was no longer considered a danger to others but to herself. "She didn't name us," he added almost gently. It felt like a strange kindness, a final act of erasure. For the first time since everything started, I sat down slowly and let it all sink in. Not with fear, not with adrenaline, but with an unsettling numbness, like waiting for a ship to dock that had already sunk. "She still thinks she had a baby," I said. He didn't reply because he didn't have to. The truth had always been impossible to accept. Somewhere along the way, grief and longing and fantasy had collapsed in her mind. What began as imitation had spiraled into delusion. A version of motherhood so deeply embedded in her that she couldn't separate it from reality anymore. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to stay inside the only story that made sense to her. "She never hated me," I whispered. "Not really. She envied you," he said. "And then she became convinced she was you." The line between love and obsession had vanished long ago. We updated our safety file, made a formal record with the hospital that she'd been admitted again. Nothing dramatic, just precautions. Not because we expected her to reach out again, but because trauma teaches you that quiet doesn't mean it's over. That night, after we put our daughter to sleep, I stood by the crib and stared at her for a long time. I thought about how close I had come to letting someone into this room. Someone who had never truly grieved, never healed, only recreated. I thought about the blanket, the text, the pink mobile she copied, the way she said, "We'll raise them together," when I was 10 weeks along. And I thought about how the world had moved on from her, while we were still learning how to breathe in it again. A few days later, I visited my mother for coffee. We didn't talk about the past much, but as I was leaving, she touched my arm and said, "Sometimes love turns into something else when it doesn't have anywhere to go." I didn't know if she meant my friend or me, but either way, she was right. When we got back home, I saw the small box waiting on our front step. No name, no return address. I didn't touch it. I called him. He opened it carefully, gloved outside. Inside, a pink photo album, empty, completely blank, just the cover embossed with gold lettering. Our first year, we reported it, documented it. There was no evidence linking it to her directly, but there didn't need to be. We knew. We didn't burn this one. We kept it in a sealed bag with the rest of the evidence. But I never opened it again because I knew what it meant. It wasn't a threat. It was a goodbye. Her final narrative was complete. The baby she imagined had lived out her story. 1 year, 1 life, 1 arc. All that remained was the keepsake. But there was no hour, not then, not ever. Only her alone and us still here, real. The words became a quiet mantra between us. In the foggy moments of sleep deprivation and the mundane tasks of new parenthood, bottles, burp cloths, endless diaper changes, we held on to that phrase like it was the only proof we needed that we had made it through. But the world has a way of catching up. It was around our daughter's first birthday. We hadn't planned anything extravagant. Just a small celebration, just the 3 of us. A vanilla cake, a silly candle. We sang off key while she smacked frosting into her hair and squealed with joy. I took a photo, posted it. First time in nearly a year. Nothing too personal, just her little hand with the candle in the background. The caption read, "One safe loved." I hesitated before pressing post, but something inside me felt ready to re-enter the world, ready to tell our story again in our own way. It took less than 2 hours for the message to come through. Not a comment, not a like, a private message request buried under spam. The name wasn't hers. It was a placeholder username just like before. But I knew the message only said, "She's beautiful. I'm glad she's okay." No threats, no accusations, just that. A part of me froze, another part didn't. I showed it to my husband. He read it, deleted it, then looked at me carefully. "She's not gone," I said. "No," he replied, "but she's not here either." And that distinction mattered because this time we didn't panic. We didn't move. We didn't change phone numbers or reset passwords. We just watched, waited. Nothing else came. A week passed, then two, and then without fanfare, a friend of mine forwarded an article, local news, a human interest piece buried under a pile of politics and weather. I clicked. She'd been hospitalized again, not from another outburst, not from an incident. She had voluntarily walked into an ER midwinter carrying nothing but a notebook. She told them she hadn't slept in 4 days, that she couldn't tell what was real anymore, that she had once had a daughter, but didn't know where she went. This time, she was admitted not under force, but by her own request. That detail hit me harder than I expected. I scrolled the article twice, hunting for more. There wasn't much. Her name had been abbreviated, no photos, no interviews, just a short blurb noting she was receiving long-term care in a state-run psychiatric facility with limited visitation. She had surrendered, not to us, to herself. I didn't know what to feel. I told my husband that night, and he said something that surprised me. She needed someone to believe she wasn't the villain. I looked at him. She did terrible things. Yes, he said. But in her mind, it was a love story, a rescue mission. She wanted to rewrite her own grief. I thought about that a long time. Later, when our daughter was asleep, we sat on the couch and I asked the question that had lingered for over a year. "Do you remember the baby shower?" He looked at me. "Of course. When you told me we had to leave, when you looked at her, did you know or did you just guess?" He paused. I recognized the look, he said finally. "I've seen it before. Patients with fixed delusions, especially postpartum psychosis. There's a tension, a kind of performance they don't realize they're doing. I saw it in her eyes, and I saw how she looked at you." I nodded. "I thought you were overreacting." I wasn't. I turned toward him softly. "Thank you for not letting me talk us into staying." He didn't answer. He just reached for my hand and held it. And for the first time, we talked about it. Not in fragments, not in panic. We walked through the entire story beginning to end, laughed at things we couldn't laugh at before, acknowledged the absurdity and the pain, named it piece by piece. By the end of the conversation, it felt like something had shifted, like the story no longer owned us. We owned it. That night, I wrote in a journal for the first time since the pregnancy. At the top of the page, I wrote, "You were my friend, then my shadow. Now you're just a chapter." And underneath, "But I am the one who finished the book, not her, not the obsession, not the fear. Me." And yet finishing the story didn't mean forgetting it. It meant living with it honestly without letting it control the present. I had spent so many months looking over my shoulder that when I finally stopped, the stillness was almost too loud. But time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges. And life, real life, kept going. Our daughter turned 16 months old last week. She's all teeth and chaos now, tripping over her own feet, laughing at her own farts, pointing at birds like they're ancient magic. She has no idea what she lived through before she even took her first breath. And maybe that's the greatest gift we could have given her. Peace that she'll never have to remember. My husband changed hospitals last spring. It was his idea. Smaller town, quieter hours. He said he needed something slower, something with fewer emergencies, fewer reminders. I think he carries more from that year than he ever let on, especially the way he spotted it before I did. The dissent, the mimicry, the obsession beneath the surface. He's good with instincts, always has been. My mother stayed close. After that coffee conversation, she became a more constant presence. Not nosy, just quietly supportive. She never asked again about the letters or the fake Instagram accounts or the hospital calls. But every few weeks she drops off groceries she accidentally overbought. Subtle, but not really. That's her way. She knows more than she says. She always has. As for the others, mutual friends, acquaintances, old coworkers, most drifted. I didn't explain much. I never went public with the details. I didn't name her. I didn't shame her. I just withdrew. Let the distance speak for itself. Some people reached out after the baby was born. Most didn't. Grief and scandal make people uncomfortable. I've learned that they prefer their messes to be loud, obvious, tragic in ways they can distance themselves from. But when something is soft and confusing and filled with ambiguity, like a woman pretending to be pregnant beside her best friend, it becomes harder to look at directly. So they didn't, and I stopped expecting them to. There was one person I kept thinking about, though, her sister. She'd only come up a few times briefly. I'd met her once at a family gathering years ago before everything. She'd been quiet, reserved, polite. I remembered she worked in education, lived 2 states away, had a soft, sad smile like she was always half apologizing for the space she took up. I found her name again last month. I didn't reach out, but I looked her up once. She hadn't posted in years. Her last photo was of a candle on a windowsill. No caption, and something about that felt final. I don't know what their relationship was like after everything that happened. I don't know if she visited the psychiatric facility, if she got a call, if she sent a letter back, but I hope she found peace too, or at least closure. Some stories don't need confrontation. They just need to end. As for her, my former best friend, I don't think of her as often now. When I do, it's not with anger. It's not even fear. It's with distance. Like looking at a house I once lived in that no longer feels like mine. I still don't know the full truth of her delusion. Whether it began as calculated or unhinged, whether she truly believed the baby inside me should have been hers, or whether she just needed something to believe in after her world broke apart. But I know what she became and what I nearly lost because I was too afraid to name it. There's no dramatic ending. She remains in care as far as I know. We've had no further contact, no new letters, no shadows and windows. The last time her name appeared anywhere near ours was during a background check for my husband's new job. A flagged incident, confidential, redacted. Still, it came up. He was transparent. The hospital board signed off without issue. Good instincts, one of them told him. We laughed about it later. I don't think I'll ever tell our daughter the full story. Maybe one day if she's grown and there's a reason, I'll explain carefully, honestly. But for now, it's just a quiet part of our past. A chapter closed, a danger faced, a home rebuilt. She won't remember the locked windows, the silent moves, the cautious steps. She'll only know we loved her enough to protect her before she was even born. And if that's all she ever knows, that's enough. Because some victories aren't loud. They're whispered at 2 a.m. over a sleeping child's breath. They're the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones no one sees. But they're real and they're ours.